somewhere in the deepest folds of the Louisiana cypress swamps, beneath canopy so thick the sun turned green before reaching the ground, there exists sealed archive the Church refuses to acknowledge. 12 documents, dated between 1847 and 1852, each recording the arrival of an abandoned child, each bearing the same guardian's name. A man who was property, not person. A man the Church later attempted to erase from its memory, in October of 1852. The Vatican received a letter so grave it was classified under the highest level of secrecy, a designation reserved only for matters capable of unsettling the foundation of faith itself. The Archbishop of New Orleans opened the packet at dusk. Witnesses claimed he wept for hours before ordering every page burned. But fire never truly destroys a story. Fragments survive. Some in private letters tucked inside family Bibles. Some in journals left in attics. Some in whispered confessions passed from generation to generation, by people who couldn't stand the thought of truth being smothered by silence. The Church still claims that the convent simply closed for financial reasons. But on a single November night, all 12 women who had taken vows there vanished from official records, their names erased, their existence unacknowledged, their fate unknown. Before you hear what really happened at the Sacred Mercy Convent and the man at the center of the scandal, consider this. If you're listening from Louisiana, from any corner of the South, or any place where history lingers in forgotten walls, leave a comment. Stories like this survive because people like you refuse to let them disappear. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now. What follows has never been told in full, and it is not an easy story to hear. The beginning of the truth at Sacred Mercy didn't look like scandal. It looked like charity. Or at least what the people of St. Landry Parish believed charity ought to be. St. Martinville sat like a forgotten pearl of French civilization in the marshland, 23 miles south of Opelousas. The Bayou Teche carved its way through fields of sugarcane and forests of moss-draped cypress, swallowing sound, light, and sometimes entire histories. The town had been founded by French aristocrats fleeing revolution, and by 1842 it still clung to a stubborn European elegance. Its church spire rose above the flat delta like a crooked finger pointing heavenward, promising order in a land that swallowed everything else. 3 miles north of town, reachable only by a narrow shell road that dissolved into mud each rainy season, stood the Convent of the Sacred Mercy, built in 1838 by Madame Celeste de Faussat, a widow whose sugar fortune could have rivaled a small nation's treasury. The convent was meant to elevate her soul in the eyes of heaven. She envisioned a haven where French-speaking sisters would teach the daughters of wealthy planters and offer basic, religious instruction to enslaved children on Sundays. A progressive notion for its time, though carefully separated by race, class, and comfort. The building itself rose in the West Indies style, perched on brick piers to resist the swamp's thirst. Wide galleries wrapped the upper and lower levels, catching the rare breezes that dared to travel through the humid air. French windows opened from floor to ceiling. Pale yellow plaster reflected what little sunlight slipped through the thick canopy. A chapel with stained glass imported from Lyon glowed like a jewel when the morning light hit it just right. 12 acres surrounded the convent. Gardens, kitchens, a cemetery ringed with iron, and at the property's farthest edge, hidden behind a veil of oaks dripping Spanish moss, stood the dependencies. Storage rooms, a laundry, a detached kitchen, and 3 small quarters for the enslaved people who maintained the estate. By 1845, 12 sisters lived there, all under 35, all from respectable Creole or French families. Their life followed the ancient rhythm of prayer, work, and silence. They rose before dawn for matins. They rotated through prime, terce, sext, nun, vespers, and finally compline, after which the night consumed them in quiet obedience. They taught reading and embroidery, tended gardens, sewed altar cloths, and kept themselves separate from the world in every way their vows demanded. Their leader was Mother Superior Therese Baron, 52, daughter of one of the region's oldest sugar dynasties. Her faith was iron, her posture unyielding, her reputation unshakable. The enslaved people assigned to the convent were gifts from wealthy benefactors. Helene, an elderly cook whose hands had delivered more children in the quarters than years she had lived. Her daughter Margot, who handled laundry. And finally Macias, the young man destined to become the center of the church's darkest secret. He arrived in March of 1845, purchased from an estate sale in New Iberia. 22 years old, light-skinned, broad-shouldered, quiet. His price was $650, considered fair for a healthy male in his prime. The bill of sale listed carpentry skills, strength, and obedience. It did not mention the things that defined him: his literacy, learned in forbidden lessons. The mother sold away when he was 7. The father beaten to death for looking the wrong man in the eye. The scars on his back from asking permission to visit his sister on a neighboring plantation. The sisters treated him with benevolent distance, the kind their faith instructed them to extend toward all of God's creatures, so long as those creatures stayed in their place. He slept in a small room attached to the tool shed, ate alone, worked alone, and moved through the grounds like a ghost summoned only to fix broken shingles, clear drainage ditches, or tend the gardens that fed the convent. He was there and not there at the same time, labor without identity, presence without recognition. For 8 months, routine held. But Sacred Mercy stood on land that remembered old stories. And in November of 1845, something shifted. Quietly at first. Then unmistakably, the first sign of trouble didn't come from within the convent. It came from a neighbor. Monsieur Laurent Guittery drank his morning coffee every day at sunrise on his gallery, his gaze sweeping across his plantations and beyond, a man evaluating his corner of the world like a chessboard. In April of 1846, he noticed something strange in the convent gardens: a child, a small figure following one of the sisters. Then another dot. By June, he counted 4. By August, he confided to his wife that something unnatural was happening. She silenced him. He told a priest. The priest dismissed him, but by October, the truth could no longer be ignored. Children 12 in total had begun appearing at the convent, infants, toddlers, all light-skinned, all mixed race, all carrying not a mother's name, but one guardian written into their secret internal records: Matthias, not because he fathered them, but because he protected them, because someone had to, and because the Sisters of Sacred Mercy had become something the Church could never allow: a shelter, a sanctuary, an underground rescue network hidden behind a wall of prayer. The scandal was only beginning. By the winter of 1846, Sacred Mercy Convent lived under 2 realities: one spoken aloud in polished French during prayers and lessons, and another carried quietly in hushed footsteps, hidden cradles, and heavy glances exchanged between women who once believed obedience was simple. The children who appeared like ghosts in the night had transformed the convent into something unrecognizable. Officially, no infants had ever crossed the threshold. Unofficially, 12 now slept in wicker baskets tucked beneath prayer benches, wrapped in scraps of old altar linens. No bells announced their arrival. No priest baptized them. No parish records acknowledged their existence. Yet their cries echoed through the galleries at dawn, and their presence hovered like incense long after Vespers ended. The sisters did not speak of how the children had reached them. Silence was their training, their shield, and now their prison. But each woman knew the truth in her own way. They arrived one at a time, left at night on the rear steps of the convent, swaddled in blankets too fine for field hands, too thin for planter families, too deliberate to be accidents. Some came with notes, Others did not. A few bore tiny tokens, half-lockets, broken rosaries. A strip of patterned cloth that spoke of a mother's desperate wish that her child not be forgotten. Each child was mixed race. Skin warm like café au lait, hair soft as moss, eyes large and watchful. In Louisiana, such children could arrive only through wrongs the law refused to name. They were reminders of violence, betrayal, and secrets planters buried beneath polished reputations. They were evidence, stains on legacies. No household wanted to acknowledge them, yet no planter wanted them wandering free. Either someone or several someones had begun to place these children at the feet of the sisters. And the sisters, bound by vows and instinct, could not turn them away, but accepting a child meant something had to be written. Every soul required a guardian on paper, even if that paper remained locked away. No sister dared attach her own name. Their reputation, their families, their church, all would crumble. So they did something that would haunt them forever. They wrote the same name 12 times. Moshe's. Because he had no legal standing. Because everything written under his name would be invisible to those who counted. Because documents listing the guardian as an enslaved man could be dismissed as clerical anomalies and tucked out of sight. It was not blame. It was protection. A shield the sisters believed would keep the children in the shadows long enough to hide them safely elsewhere. But in choosing his name, they bound him to the children in the eyes of the church, in the eyes of anyone who discovered the records, in the eyes of history itself. Moshe did not argue. There was nothing to argue. For an enslaved man in Louisiana, identity was paper-thin, assigned, traded, rewritten. A name meant little when your life belonged to someone else. But the weight of 12 children, all officially tethered to him, pressed into his chest in ways he could not name. He saw the children sometimes from a distance, when he moved silently across the grounds before dawn. Small figures swaddled in quilts, little hands reaching up toward the faces of women who had sworn never to raise children of their own. He listened to the soft murmurs through open windows, the forbidden lullabies, the prayers spoken with trembling faith, and each time he turned away, part of him remained standing at the threshold of those rooms, wondering if this was punishment or purpose. The convent changed in ways no one expected. The sisters' routines fractured. Their faces thinned with exhaustion. Their eyes carried a new alertness, fear mixed with love. Duty tangled with guilt. Mother Superior Therese felt the shift most sharply. Her posture, once unshakable, now leaned under the burden of a secret too large for prayer alone. She had been raised in a world where order was equated with holiness, where deviation was sin. Now she presided over a sanctuary constructed through disobedience. She watched her sisters rock infants in dim corners, their expressions softened in ways she could not fully reproach. They were women, after all, flesh and spirit, not stone. But the church was not as forgiving. Rumors began long before evidence surfaced. A planter's wife mentioned seeing the child through the trees. Another whispered that the convent hid Creole orphans. A priest noted that Mother Superior's letters had become strangely brief, evasive. The first external warning came from Father Dominique Roussel, old and hard of hearing, who sensed turmoil in confessionals. Parishioners spoke of strange lights at night, women carrying bundles through the gardens, whispers too heavy for ordinary life. He dismissed most of it until a planter from St. Martinville confided that he had discovered a servant missing along with her newborn child, and that her tracks led toward the convent. By the spring of 1847, Mother Superior began to take precautions. She reduced the sisters' visits to the town. She sent only written messages to the parish priest. She forbade any mention of the children inside or outside the convent. Silence thickened until it felt like another wall. The children multiplied uncertainties. Each new arrival intensified the risk. 12 souls now depended on decisions the sisters were not trained to make. These women had chosen a life without family, without motherhood, believing themselves immune to the world's entanglements. But the world had arrived anyway, wrapped in blankets and placed at their door. The first real fracture came from within. Sister Marie Claire, once steady as an oak rooted in faith, began to unravel. She described dreams of flames consuming the convent. She trembled during matins, unable to finish her prayers. She feared they were committing a sin so vast that heaven itself turned its face away, but others believed the opposite. Sister Angelique claimed the children were a calling, a divine correction to the cruelty outside their gates. She said their appearance was grace disguised as danger. 2 visions, 2 certainties, and a community balanced between them. Through all of this, Maius became something unseen but essential, a guardian, a shadow fence between the convent and the world. He shifted his work to the darkest hours, clearing paths, repairing gates, making the place look untouched by crisis. He avoided the galleries, avoided the sisters' eyes, and carved out a life of solitary purpose near the edge of the woods. But trouble finds cracks. A letter was sent in May of 1849, its origin unclear, its path undeniable. A note to New Orleans hinting at impropriety, secrecy, and unnatural activity at Sacred Mercy. It reached a desk where it should not have been read. And from there, it traveled upward to the Archbishop. What happened next sealed the fate of 12 women, 12 children, and 1 man who had never asked for any of this. The church was coming, and it would not come gently. The letter that reached the Archdiocese of New Orleans in the summer of 1849 was brief, unsigned, and written in a deliberately shaky hand. It mentioned no names, no accusations, no explicit wrongdoing. Only a single disturbing claim: there are children hidden at Sacred Mercy. The Archbishop, Henry Marie Laurent, read the note twice before setting it aside. For years he had weathered rumors about the convent, whispers of unusual activity, sightings of women carrying bundles at strange hours, unexplained absences from parish events. Most he dismissed as the usual anxieties projected onto cloistered places. But this letter carried something different. The phrasing was restrained, almost fearful. The kind of caution used by someone who had seen too much and understood too well the danger of speaking plainly. The Archbishop sent for Father Louis Habert, a meticulous cleric known for his discreet handling of sensitive matters. With him came Father Michel Dauphin, a Jesuit trained in canonical law, whose reputation for compliance made him suitable for quiet corrections. Both men studied the letter under lamplight, weighing possibilities. Perhaps the convent had taken in orphans. Perhaps charity had gone beyond approved boundaries. But the mention of children in the plural hinted at something larger, something that threatened not just Sacred Mercy, but the Church's authority in the region. Louisiana was a place of tension. Catholics wrestled with Presbyterians, Anglicans, Baptists, and the unspoken pull of older beliefs carried from Africa and the Caribbean. One misstep could feed the fires of anti-Catholic sentiment, and news of a compromised convent would be the spark. The Archbishop decided to investigate personally, quietly, without the Church's broader hierarchy knowing. If something improper had occurred, it must be contained before scandal rippled outward. He arrived at Sacred Mercy on October 20th, 1850. No procession. No carriage bearing the insignia of his office. Just a simple black coach carrying 3 men, whose arrival would alter the fate of everyone within those pale yellow walls. Mother Superior Therese met them in the chapel. She bowed with the precision of someone who knew her position and its vulnerabilities. Her face was composed, but her eyes held the faint shine of a woman accustomed to crushing fear with discipline. She led them to a small receiving room. The walls bore paintings of saints whose eyes followed every movement. The Archbishop studied her closely. She seemed unchanged from their last meeting a year earlier, tall, rigid, careful in gesture. Yet beneath her discipline, he sensed strain. He began with polite inquiries about the convent's financial health, its enrollment, its relations with the parish. She answered each question neatly, offering numbers she seemed to have prepared in advance. But when discussion turned to the children, her posture stiffened. Father Dauphin produced the letter. Mother Superior received it without touching it, as though the parchment itself carried contagion. Her breath remained steady, but her throat tightened visibly. She confirmed nothing. She denied nothing. She only appealed to their understanding that Sacred Mercy had always acted with devotion and discretion, that their service extended beyond classrooms and chapel walls, that charity sometimes took forms not easily explained to outsiders. The Archbishop did not accept ambiguity. He requested to speak privately with each sister. One by one, the 12 women entered the chapel. One by one, they knelt before him. And one by one, he saw the same haunted weariness behind their eyes. Not guilt, not defiance. Something more complex. A sorrow woven into silence that each claimed ignorance of any wrongdoing. Each insisted the convent remained faithful to Rome. Each avoided direct mention of the children whose presence now filled the very air. The Archbishop felt truth pressing against the walls. Trying to escape. It was Helene, the elderly cook, who broke first. Not intentionally. But when he questioned her about irregular deliveries of food, she flinched in a way that revealed more than words. An experienced confessor recognizes the weight of hidden suffering. She carried something she could not speak. Something too large for a woman in her position to reveal without consequence. That night, the Archbishop, Father Habert, and Father Dauphin walked the grounds. The moon filtered through moss, casting long shadows across the galleries. The swamp hummed with nocturnal life. And somewhere in the distance, they heard a sound that did not belong, a soft cry, too high and fragile to be anything but a child. They followed it to the laundry house. Inside, hidden behind stacked basins, they found 2 small hammocks fashioned from linen scraps. Empty, but unmistakable, their investigation continued until dawn, yielding scraps of evidence. A tiny blanket tucked behind a cistern, a wooden toy carved with clumsy tenderness, a ledger entry listing supplies for infants, written a number of hands and then crossed out. When they confronted the Mother Superior at sunrise, she understood immediately that silence was no longer a shield. The Archbishop demanded clarity. She gave him truth stripped of its context, pared down to the parts she believed necessary. Yes, 12 children had come. Yes, the convent had sheltered them. No, the church had not been informed, but she did not admit how the children arrived. She did not explain the sisters' role in rescuing them. She did not reveal the people who smuggled them through the swamp's mothers fleeing violence. Fathers desperate enough to entrust their infants to strangers in habits. Enslaved women who carried babies past hounds and patrols. Planters' wives placing infants at the gates under cover of night. And she did not mention Messias. Not because she sought to protect him, but because she believed that even speaking his name in this context could destroy him. But the Archbishop had seen enough. He requested every document, every ledger, every note, every scrap of paper bearing the children's names. The sisters surrendered them reluctantly, understanding that compliance was the only remaining shield between themselves and ruin. As the Archbishop read through the files, a detail froze him. Every document named one guardian. Every file tied 12 children to one man. Masha's. A shock rippled through him, not because he believed Masha's fathered them, but because he understood the implication. The sisters had used him as a shield, used his legal invisibility as their boundary between sin and salvation, used his name as a vault for secrets they could not bear to carry alone. The Archbishop felt betrayal. Not of doctrine alone, but of order, of the hierarchy upon which the Church depended. Something had happened at Sacred Mercy, something that had turned 12 devout women into conspirators, something that pulled an enslaved groundskeeper into the center of a mystery dangerous enough to threaten the Church's stability. he announced a temporary suppression of the convent. The investigation would continue in New Orleans. Sacred Mercy would be sealed until Rome decided its fate. The sisters cried silently. Not one protested. Mother Superior simply bowed her head. When the Archbishop departed, he believed he had contained the scandal. But he had misjudged the depth of the roots, because secrets like these do not die when buried. They multiply. They spread. They wait, and Sacred Mercy had 12 reasons to do both. The Archbishop's carriage rolled away from Sacred Mercy with the confidence of a man who believed the storm had been contained. He carried with him the documents, the ledgers, the fragments of truth he intended to reshape into something the Church could file away without ever acknowledging publicly. The convent, now under suppression, was to remain silent. The sisters were ordered to await reassignment. Their future hung between obedience and erasure. But Sacred Mercy did not wait for Rome. It had its own reckoning to deliver. For weeks after the Archbishop's departure, the 12 sisters lived in a suspended state between duty and dread. Their routines continued mechanically, prayers spoken without breath, chores performed without thought, but beneath the surface, the community hummed with restrained panic. The convent had always been a place where silence carried authority. Now silence carried consequence. The sisters gathered in small clusters after Compline, whispering fears they could not confess aloud. What would Rome decide? Where would they be sent? Would they be separated? Punished? Stripped of their vows? And deeper still was a worry. None dared speak. What would happen to the children? Not just the 12 they had sheltered. Those were already hidden elsewhere under assumed names. But the others. The ones whose mothers still planned to bring them through the swamps when danger grew too close. The ones not yet born but soon to arrive at their gate. The ones who depended on the convent's secrecy for survival. Sacred Mercy had become a refuge in ways the Church had never intended. And now that refuge was collapsing. Mother Superior Therese felt the weight more heavily than anyone. She moved through the halls as though carved from stone. But inside she warred with the knowledge that obedience to the Church meant abandoning the very souls who had been placed in their care by circumstance, desperation, and injustice. Her authority was collapsing. Her certainty had already vanished. And yet, responsibility held her upright. Messieurs, exiled to the cabin at the edge of the property, felt the shift in the air long before the sisters understood its meaning. He watched the convent from the tree line, lanterns burning later than usual, silhouettes pacing in rooms that once held stillness, windows left open in the cold to vent breathless anxiety. He was no longer called to work. No chores assigned. No tools left out. It was as though the sisters expected him to disappear along with the scandal, another detail the Church could sweep away. But Masha's remained rooted, unwilling to abandon the only people who had ever treated him with something resembling humanity, even if that humanity had been tangled with fear and secrecy. He sensed something coming. Something final. And he was right. The decision was made on a night of heavy mist, when the moon was a blurred coin behind the clouds. The sisters gathered in the chapel, 12 women kneeling in 2 rows before the altar where they had taken their vows. But this time, they knelt not for devotion, but for determination. Mother Superior stood before them, her face pale with resolve. She announced that the Church would not decide their fate. They would. Sacred Mercy would not be remembered as a place of scandal. It would not become a cautionary tale whispered in parish halls. And it would not surrender the memory of what had happened here to the hands of men who saw the world only through hierarchy and fear. They would leave together. All 12. Before the Church returned to dismantle the life they had built, the sisters did not weep. They did not gasp. They simply bowed their heads, accepting the decision with the solemn clarity of women who had lost everything except each other. They spent the next 2 hours in silent motion. They packed nothing. They left habits folded neatly on their beds. They extinguished every lantern, closed every shutter, covered every painting, and in an act of both reverence and rebellion, they locked the chapel from the inside and placed the key under the statue of Saint Michael, the patron of warriors. At midnight, they gathered at the edge of the garden where the path vanished into the cypress grove. There, in the shadows, Mashes waited, not summoned, not instructed, simply present, because he understood without being told that the sisters were about to walk into danger. He carried nothing but a small satchel. His face was unreadable in the dim light. The sisters approached him without hesitation. In the strange equilibrium that had formed between them over years of silent encounters, their presence beside him felt inevitable. No words passed between them. No explanations. No farewells. Together they stepped into the trees. The swamp swallowed them quickly, its darkness thick and damp. Spanish moss brushed their shoulders. Water lapped at their skirts. Cypress knees jutted like warning fingers from the earth. Yet none hesitated. The path they followed was not random. It was the same route used by those who had brought the children. The sisters knew it from memory twists and turns carried in whispered instructions, and half-lit stolen moments. By dawn, Sacred Mercy was empty. When Father Habert returned 2 days later with clerical officials to collect further evidence, he found the convent abandoned, beds untouched, books shelved, dishes clean. No sign of struggle, no sign of flight, only absence complete and bewildering. The documents the Archbishop had confiscated were the only proof the convent had ever sheltered children at all. Rome received a report of mass dereliction and scandal, but the conclusions were vague. No one could explain how 12 women vanished into the swamps without leaving footprints behind. No trail, no bodies, no rumors. Within months, Sacred Mercy was shuttered, boarded over, and left to rot. By the time the Civil War broke out, the building had collapsed into itself, swallowed by vines and humidity. Locals avoided the ruins, muttering that the ground felt wrong beneath their feet, as though something unseen still lived there. As for the sisters and Mashes, their fate was never recorded in church archives. But fragments survived in places no one expected, in ledgers from freedmen schools, in baptismal records across Alabama and Mississippi, in dusty parish files showing women with new names, teaching children of all colors to read. Somewhere in those scattered records, a pattern emerges: 12 women traveling under assumed identities, a tall man who cleared land and built cabins, children growing up healthy, educated, and far from the places where their lives began. History remembers Sacred Mercy as a rumor. The Church remembers it as an inconvenience. But the children, those 12 souls left on cold steps in the moonlight, remember it as salvation, and that, in the end, is the only truth that mattered.